Hello and welcome to this episode of Joy of Science, a Research Matters podcast bringing you the stories behind exciting research endeavors. I'm your host, Spoorthy Raman, talking to Professor Sumana Annagiri, our guest for today. Professor Annagiri is the principal investigator of the Ant Lab at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Kolkata. She has been studying the behavior of ants since a decade, and her lab has uncovered some interesting facts about an Indian species of ant called Diacama indica, which was previously unknown to science. Professor Annagiri, thank you so much for joining and thank you for your time. Welcome to this episode of Joy of Science. So to start with, as kids, we've all seen ants, been with, probably disturbing a few ants and playing with a few ants, etc. And that's probably some of us may have been bitten with by ants or stung by ants, and that's kind of what ant really comes up when you talk to most of us. So, what motivated you to study ants?
Yes, we've all encountered ants. We have done a few nasty things to them as well. You typically not want a trail of ants in your kitchen, taking away food material that you like yourself. But this is just one side of the lives of ants. There are a large variety of ants, about 12,500 species across the world, and a large number of them live in our country right along with us, and we have almost no idea of what their lives are. So I was interested in understanding how ants will move their homes from one location to another while carrying hundreds of other nestmates and all the young ones, that is the brood of the colony, from one place into another. That was my primary motivation, having relocated myself from the US to India. I saw this relocation occur literally at my doorstep, and it was so fascinating, and I was anyway interested about insects, and that's when I started working on this.
Wow, this is really an interesting story. Yes, relocation is stressful. Maybe we'll come to a little later on, understanding how ants really deal with it. But then before that, you mentioned that there are about 12,500 different species of ants in the world. And how well do we know Indian ants? And can you give us like a snapshot of how many species could be here? And considering this is a tropical country, I'm assuming there could be a lot of varieties. And yes, most of us know as black ants, red ants, and ants that bite and ants that don't. And what does science say about it at the moment?
Uh, I am not aware actually of how many species are present in our country, because we have very less literature on this. The ballpark number would be certainly higher than 2000 species. There are possibly 3 people in the entire country of such a large number of humans who have even attempted to document the number of ants that are present in our country. So that is the only ballpark that I can give right now, more than about 2000 for sure.
Cool. So that's quite an impressive number, and it's sad that we don't really know anything about most of them. Talking a little, in depth about your specific ant of interest, Diacama indica. What are some of those features that are very special to this particular ant?
Okay, Diacama indicum is a species of ant that's only found in India, Sri Lanka, in this region only. And the highlight for this, for a research point of view, is that the colony sizes are quite small by ant standards. It's in the hundreds, and this allows me to be able to mark every individual ant and follow their behavior at an individual level, so we can figure out exactly what ants are doing in a given task, and that is what made me pick Diacama indica. This is also a species that is there in Bengal where I work. That is a second reason. It's always useful to have this focal species in your vicinity. And the third feature is that it is relatively easy to collect this species of ant. It is relatively easy to maintain them in the lab, and when you want to do rigorous scientific experiments, sample sizes are particularly important, and it would be easier to work with species that are available in abundance.
Yeah, makes sense, total sense. You said a very interesting point saying you want to individually mark ants. Can you just give us a thought about how you do it, and what's behind marking them and feeding them, storing in the lab? What does it all entail?
Marking them really is the first step of our research because, like you would have seen, most ants are either black or red to us, and their bodies are identical. Adult ants do not grow, they have a fixed body length and width and so forth, and they're very similar to each other. So, if you're interested in what ants do, what their lives are about, then you would have to first delineate one individual from another, and the only way to do this is to mark them with enamel paint on different parts of their body. So for us, an ant is not just an ant, but it's a roll number that we give them or an identity that we give them. And on a daily basis, we take census of the colony to see whether the ants that we have marked are there, what are they doing, for how long do they do the things that they are going to be doing. So this would be the beginning of quantitative research on the lives of ants. We collect these colonies from the natural habitat and maintain them in small plastic boxes within our laboratories in an artificial nest that is made of plaster of Paris and a small petri plate. We keep them typically for about 10-15 days and then release them back into the natural habitat.
And most of your research or your lab's research has been focused on relocation of ants, so moving from one nest to another nest. You did explain that the moment when you had to relocate was something that inspired you to take up relocation as a area of research for you, or an area of interest for you on these ant studies. But from an ant's perspective, in an ant's life, how big is this event of relocation and why?
So yes, literally when I moved here, I saw a colony of Dicama indica moving into a flower pot inside my house. Uh, and then when I looked into the scientific literature, I found that there is hardly any information on how colonies relocate. And this is unlike a job that ants would be doing on a daily basis, for example, foraging, where they would go on a daily basis outside their nest, a few ants, to get food or building material that they require and come back into the nest. Whereas relocation is a goal oriented task. This has to be an occupation that has a very clear start and it has a clear ending when all of the colony mates reach to the new nest. So, the manner in which this is organized and the manner in which it is conducted will directly impact the reproductive ability of the colony as well as its survival. So, I thought that this would be a fantastic platform on which to study various aspects of division of labor in this species and look at it both in the natural habitat of these ants as well as within controlled laboratory settings and contrast these findings to understand the process of relocation itself, which has been documented very little bit, and we are the first ones to be doing it in the entire world in the natural habitat.
Wow, that is really impressive. And I'm sure when you mentioned about laboratory settings, you did explain about how you store ants and everything. So, what does a typical day look like in your lab for you and for your students?
Um, a lot of what we really like to do is observations. Look at the level of the organism and try to give them challenging tasks to do and figure out how they're performing it, if they can do it at all. And that's what we would like the whole day to be about. However, in practical terms, there are a lot of things that we have to do in addition. Um, the analysis of what we have recorded in our observation takes about 3 times the time that is required for observation. So it's a lot of statistics, modeling that is required, a lot of video types that have to be decoded in order to be able to quantitatively say with statistical significance that something is happening. And that journey is a lot more rigorous than just making a mere observation, as you're walking in your park. So that journey is something that one has to learn how to do it and be truly fascinated in order to have sustained levels of motivation to do that.
True.
That is what my students would be facing as a challenge, I'm sure.
So yeah, this is like an interesting point where you say perseverance is important. You need to have that level of motivation, not just observe how it's happening in the park, get all the more excited and elated, and say, okay, I want to replicate in the lab and see, okay, and write a paper about these behaviors and stuff. So what are those typical moments of despair or disappointments that students who are enthusiastic about behavior ecology or animal behavior really face in probably your lab but on a general context?
Yeah. The biggest frustration for most researchers in this area is seasonality. So, when you're tracking individual organisms or their nests in the natural habitat, you really have to have the patience and the planning to do it when it is amicable to the creature of interest. It is not something that's in a petri plate and you decide at 9 a.m. in the morning that I will do this experiment. It is something that the organisms would decide for you as to when you can do a particular experiment or you cannot do these observations. So, learning that and being able to appreciate the natural habitat in which these organisms live and ask meaningful questions from this can become quite frustrating for people who are not exposed to ecology and behavior category of research.
And yes, when you talk about ants specifically, yes, as I mentioned, people are going to be bitten by it. Some people may be scared of ants, but still want to know about it. And in the lab, obviously, you said you will get a colony and then track that, etc. So, how do you prevent ant bites?
In the lab, we take the precaution of wearing a simple pair of plastic gloves, and that is sufficient for the species of interest, which is another highlight from our point of view. The creatures that we work with, Dicama indicum, are scavengers and they are not predatory in nature. So they are not extremely aggressive, which helps us do the day to day activities and the pain that we cause them. But in general, it's best to maintain distance from the ants. There are some that bite, some that sting, some that spray acid on you, and so forth. But that is the way that they can survive and face predators in their natural habitat. So, the best solution would be to maintain distance and watch them from a reasonable distance instead of provoking them to come and investigate what is bothering them.
Sure, and then get bitten and then blame the ants. No,
Yes.
they are not supposed to be the ones
Yes.
to be blamed.
Yes.
And yes, ants have been around for maybe millions of years, and they surely have a role to play in our surroundings on this planet. In fact, David Attenborough had done a very beautiful documentary just featuring these carpenter ants. I'm sure that's in the temperate regions, not somewhere close by. But then, in your view, for a country like India, what ecological roles do these tiny creatures really play?
All right, so ants have an extremely important role in the ecosystem. They've been here for about 140 million years. The dinosaurs arrived on Earth and disappeared. The ants were there before that, and they continue to exist here. So they have got many features, right, in the manner of survival, in the manner of adapting to the changes that the environment has given to them. Uh, they ants are one of the groups of creatures which have a position in all the strata of the food pyramid, except of course the producers. So they can be primary consumers, they can be secondary consumers, they can also be scavengers, and they help in decomposing of a great deal of material in the environment. Further, they also act as farmers because they rear aphids, which is part of the ecosystem. Next, they are very good pest controllers as they attack termites and get rid of them. In addition, they do work as pollinators. Uh, the amount of crop produced by a plant which is protected by ants is larger than ones where ants are not there to defend the plant from predators. So the relationship that ants have with the ecosystem is quite diverse, and this is not as well studied as what honeybees would have been receiving attention for, but the ants certainly have a very important role, and they're good in adapting to the changes that are present in the environment.
Thank you, ma'am. I think that is really eye-opening to learn that a lot of ants are helpful in pollination, because when somebody says pollination, the obvious ones are going to be the butterflies, the honeybees, and pretty much the conservation efforts towards preserving pollinators have been conserving these species. And often in a garden, ants are the most probably overlooked because they're just there, and to know that they actually control pests and save your garden from being eaten away by other insects that you don't want them to be eaten by. I think this is great.
Yeah, just to add to that list, they also turn around a great deal of soil. So, next to the earthworms, ants are considered as the second most important turners of soil, such that the nutrients can be recycled in the soil. So, that is another contribution that ants would be making to the ecosystem.
Okay, then I think if you have a garden, ants are your best friends.
Yes.
Keep them there, keep them safe. Um, so, when ants are doing such a great deal for the planet, for us, what are some of the things that we can learn from ants? Are there any lessons that you have discovered to say, okay, lessons for life?
Well, I am typically wary of thinking of taking lessons directly from the creatures that we study, or imposing our values on the creatures that we study, because both of this would lead us in the wrong path in terms of the scientific discovery and value that we attach to what we find. So, in general, the saying is that ants are extremely hardworking, behave like an ant, and so forth. However, having studied ants at their home for long periods of time, I would not agree that all ants are extremely hardworking. There are many ants, and the biological clock or their system is similar to other creatures, and they would also rest and take a break as much as what other organisms do, I'm sure. So, if you see ants scurrying around and working hard, that is simply 10% of the colony, whereas the 90% of the remaining ants are inside the nest, possibly resting or doing other housekeeping jobs that are inside the nest. So, it would be too far-fetched for us to simply say or come to a conclusion based on very limited information. We would have to study the ants a lot more in order to understand and appreciate what their lives entail.
Sure, and I'm sure you're taking the first step, and I'm sure the listeners are also going to be mesmerized by all these information that you've shared with us today. The question back to you then is, before you began all your studies, you would have probably had some hypothesis of what ants were capable of, and now 10 years down the lane, are there any traits or any specific qualities that have surprised you, excited you, or disappointed you from where you started?
I was working on other social insects before I started ants, and when I first saw the relocation, I thought, okay, this seems quite simple. It should be decipherable. Maybe 6 months, a year, maybe 5 years. I should certainly be done with answering things that are related to relocation. But after having worked on it for about 11 years, not just by myself, but with the support and the great dedication and enthusiasm of my students, we find that in our lab, we have really just seen the first 10% of the challenges that relocation offers to a creature that is really small, with a tiny brain less than 1 millimeter. So this itself is a humongous, I would not say a surprise, but it's a challenge, because I started off being quite simplistic about it, and I find that even understanding one aspect in the life of a creature takes humongous amount of time and effort. And even in my lifetime, if I can understand all relocation aspects about one species, that itself would be quite fulfilling.
True. And this is exciting for a lot of listeners, I'm sure, to find out that, a lot of organisms around us, from ants to probably elephants, don't really have a simple decipherable life. They have a lot of complexities going on, and there is this budding group of animal behavior enthusiasts trying to either read up on this or pursue it as an academic career and things like that. So is there like a small message that you want to share about being in this field for so long, about how and what to expect and what to look forward in the field of animal behavior research?
It's very important for humans, the next generation of students, whether they're in the school or colleges, to try and stay in tune with nature. Increasingly, we are becoming so urbanized that we are losing touch with where we started off from. So, if you get a chance, go to a park, go to a wildlife reserve, and be there. I mean, just try to keep your eyes and mind and ears open to other living creatures that are there right with us, and try to think of how fascinating their lives are. That is a very nice way to be encouraging scientific study inquiry. That's the beginning of scientific inquiry. And this is a field that does not require a great deal of background knowledge in order to start your research or start experimenting with. We've all experimented with putting water down ant colonies when you were a kid, and it was great fun to do, just to see what happens. And that basic curiosity is what drives humans. The passion that we have for following what happens is what determines the path that we take.
Thank you, ma'am. This is wonderful. I think at least there will be some portion of the listeners who are going to be fascinated, considering we have, as you pointed out, seeming to lose regards for animals and other beings that are coexisting with us. So the first step probably is to appreciate what they are capable of, and then to realize how much they impact our lives in different ways that's possible. So thank you so much for your time, and this is an interesting conversation, I'm sure. And I hope this episode will inspire people to look a lot differently and a lot maturely at ants, rather than simply playing with them, being destructive, and to just back off and see, oh yeah, this is something I can relate to, and an observation that I think is interesting. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being a great guest on this episode of Joy of Science. And with that, we sign off.
Okay, thanks for having me in, and keep your curiosity up.
Thank you. That's a great ending note. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. We will be back soon with another episode of Research Bites. This podcast was brought to you by Research Matters, a SciComm initiative by Gooby Labs. For more such podcasts and science news, log on to www.researchmatters.in. Until next time, stay tuned.